Welcome to the 11th Annual South Bronx Folk Festival. Como ustedes saben, el COVID-19, as you know, the COVID-19 has changed the way we gather, and this year we are in a virtual platform. Este año estamos haciéndolo virtualmente para todos ustedes. As usual, we will continue celebrating the Puerto Rican Heritage Month, highlighting the cultural diversity in our community. Y como de costumbre, vamos a seguir celebrando nuestra cultura puertorriqueña, no importa que un virus nos ataque. Nosotros somos más que eso y nuestra cultura vale más que todo eso. Welcome y disfruten de Puerto Rico. ¡Que viva Puerto Rico!
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to the second panel of Connecting the Roots of Traditional Dance and Spirituality. My name is Yasmar Cruz. I am the director of Danzartes, and today I have the honor to present you the second panel where we're going to be examining the African diaspora dances, traditions, and spirituality, and how we can find the roots of these dances and these traditions on the performance space. In these panels, our speakers will examine the spirituality remnants that prevail on dances when taken out of a communal space and are transferred into the stage. So we're going to think about spirituality in the context of that practice that nurtures and enriches our spirit and how we can connect with that spirit via dance, music, and our traditions. I would love to welcome today my first panelist, Doctora Marta Moreno Vega, and from Segunda Quimbamba, Juan Cartagena and Nanette Hernández.
Hola, ¿qué tal?
Hola, saludos.
Saludos desde Luisa.
Muchísimas gracias por haberme acompañado y haber aceptado esta invitación. I am so glad to have you here with us. And for everyone to have a little bit of context of what we're talking about here, I would love to share that how every element, right, when we think about African traditions or African spirituality, how every element from costumes to songs to storytelling to dance to music, everything complements a whole, and how we can see and how we can connect our spirit to that when we see a performance, when we are dancing in a performance, when we're creating the performance. And I would love to start with the tradition of bomba, which is our African-derived tradition from the 16th century, more or less. And we see the dancing, the singing, we see everybody coming together and experiencing that community and communal feeling. So my first question for you will be, how much of that spirituality could still be remaining within the songs, the dance, and the practice as we see it today?
Go ahead, Juan.
Well, sure, of course. I mean, we can talk about this for many hours and actually days. So there is an innate, organic spirituality of all the drum music that we practice in Puerto Rico because it reflects the African diaspora throughout the Caribbean and throughout Central America and South America. So in the most simplest forms, the spirituality that exists in the bate or bomba is innate to the fact that we are practicing rhythms and performance space in a bate, in a communal setting that allows for unstated and probably misunderstood way of how spirituality affects all our practice. Now, in the years and years and years that we've been doing this with Segunda Quimbamba, we've found many ways in which we deliberately bring in spirituality to our performances. It often happens when people are very, very ill or when they transition to the other world, right? And when they pass away. For example, and in this past week, we had Raul Wilson from Danza Fiesta. We had Benny Ayala from the Bronx. We had this guy in New Jersey, the father of one of our performers, John Calpena. And in the circle, a drum circle that we did in the park with John Calpena, just last weekend, we were there to exhibit how we perform bomba in a space in which we actually connect to the ancestors. Because for us, bomba is connection to our ancestors, and bomba is a way that we can bring them into a circle. And while we can talk about the religious aspects of bomba, and talk about the debate that occurs in Puerto Rico about how it's divorced, it's more secular. Nothing changes the fact that when we perform this, it is incredibly spiritual and it's incredibly moving. But it's also incredible because we know we bring our ancestors into the circle.
Thank you so much, Juan.
Well, we need to look at it historical, right? What we know from our research is that the Africans that were enslaved and brought into Puerto Rico was primarily from West and Central Africa, all right? And that enslavement in Puerto Rico lasted until 1873. So when you're looking at the creation of bomba, you're looking at the creation of various ethnic groups coming together, not in friendship necessarily, but for survival, in terms of finding ways of resisting oppression and resisting enslavement. Bomba in its creation and its process of creation addressed drums providing messages from plantation to plantation, from groups to other groups, right? So it's a language. The drum is a language. Dance is a language. The way that you move your skirt, the way that you move your hands is a language. So that originally these traditions come out of enslaved people looking for their liberation. And in that process, right, as time goes on, as generations go forward, it becomes a form of entertainment. But that does not, as Juan said, take away the origins of it in honoring anything that has an African base as a spiritual base. You can't take that away. That is integral to African traditions, African belief systems, African spirituality. And what we have to look at is the different generations of how these traditions evolve under racism, under discrimination, under enslavement, because remember, Puerto Rico had enslavement until 1873. That was yesterday. Any of us can go back 3 generations and identify one of our grandparents, one of our tíos y tías, right? Abuelas, as being enslaved or recently out of enslavement. So that these traditions live within our communities. That racism, Spanish colonialism tried to oppress them and erase them, we can't deny that. And the work that in Yasmar, I was talking to you before, and Juan, in doing what he's doing with La Segunda Quimbamba, is maintaining these traditions and investigating these traditions. And when you talk about people who have gone and then you honor them with the drum, what is that? But the honoring of those traditions that were brought during the 15th, 16th century into Puerto Rico and into the Caribbean.
I personally feel that in my life I've carried pain that I can't always describe, but I feel like that pain is from my ancestors. And I feel that when I perform and I hear drum, that seems to be interpreted through my movement. And so I've experienced it in trauma, the sense of uplifting and spiritually feeling connected, including when I lost my parents. So that was trauma to my heart. And at another time, when I had trauma to my body. So as you mentioned, illness. So in both occasions in dance, it was one time here in New Jersey and the second time in Hormigueros in Puerto Rico, where I had the opportunity to be in that space, in community, and be able to come out and performance, but feeling as though my parents were dancing with me, which changed me after that performance, because I stopped lamenting, because I was always crying when we performed after I lost them. Naturally, I had to express it. And there I realized, oh, Dios mío, what they gave me was the legacy of them, the legacy of the love of the culture of Puerto Rico, of where I'm from, of where I'm rooted, of the connection that is deeper than I can express or understand. And I feel that bomba music has helped me make some connections to things in my life that I still don't understand. Pero la bomba me ha dado esa oportunidad de expresarme en una manera tal que no la tengo en ningún otro lado. And it's not always there that you are, but when you are at that plane, as when I had illness, I was changed again. It made me stronger. It's making me give more. And it's making me seek more to understand more. Y para mí, that's all spiritual, that's all uplifting. And I see it in the young children I teach now, the young people I teach, when they express it back to me in what they do in action and in their eyes. And that's what I carry with me, and that's what I try to interpret, and that's what I try to share en esa plataforma, sea la tarima o sea aquí contigo, right on la tierra, the earth. That's to me is something that I'm learning to share and talk about more too. And I thank you for this opportunity.
Yeah, Yasmal, I think you would agree, Yasmal, that because I've seen you perform too. But there's a big difference between performance on a stage and performance in the batey, in a natural setting. And a lot of what we're describing here, at least from my perspective, and of course Nanette's perspective, because I was with her when she did both times that she was there talking about, and it was beautiful to see her. Those examples are really the spontaneous way that we express ourselves in the batey. The artificial quality of being on a stage tries to imitate what we learn in the batey and what we express in the batey. And sometimes we succeed. But at the end of the day, this kind of conversation about what we feel and what we do when we perform, when we express ourselves in bomba, it's much more about how we express ourselves in this organic way of getting together with people that we love and we share, and just open up the circle to a force that we have to recognize as real.
Thank you so much, Nanette, for sharing that personal experience. And I could definitely relate to it. It is a space for liberation and for freedom, right? And as you mentioned, it is something that you cannot get any other place. It is like the combination of everyone who was there before you and who was there with you, embracing you, and kind of speaking through those drums to let you know that it doesn't matter what's happening. It doesn't matter what you're going through. We got you, and everything's going to be okay. And it's like opening up, right? Opening up your heart, your spirit, and connecting. Like it's like a plug connecting straight to the root of where you're coming from, right? Like that space, familiar space that feels like home. So with that in mind, I want to invite you to take a look at this video. And it's interesting because what Juan just said about what happens in the batey versus what happens when we're on stage, yes, it's almost as we're trying to bring that feeling from here to the stage. And sometimes we succeed. Sometimes it happens, right? Sometimes the connection is there and you can go into it. And other times it's like, well, this is the show. But in this particular performance, we're bringing a saint, right? We're talking about the tradiciones de Santiago Apóstol de Loíza. And in this artistic representation, which was used to open the Puerto Rican Day Parade, we see a procession. We see Santiago coming in. And this is a beautiful tradition. And I'm pretty sure that if I interview people from Loíza and the way it's carried there versus what we see on stage, it's different. But that spiritual and religious component is there. So let's take a look at this video and we'll talk about it in a minute.
¿Quién ha visto por ahí mi sombrero de Yare? ¿Quién ha visto por ahí mi sombrero de Yare? ¿Quién ha visto por ahí mi sombrero de Yare? ¿Quién ha visto por ahí mi sombrero de Yare? Mi sombrero de Yare, mi sombrero es de Yare. ¿Quién ha visto por ahí mi sombrero de Yare? ¿Quién ha visto por ahí mi sombrero de Yare? La de ya, dile a Conde que suba, ay, dile a Conde que suba por la ventana ya. Dile a Conde que suba por la ventana. La de ya, dile a Conde que suba, ay, dile a Conde que suba por la ventana ya. Dile a Conde que suba por la ventana. Ay, dile que baile bomba, ay, dile que baile bomba con la negra más linda de todas. Dile a Conde que suba por la ventana. Con su traje hilo blanco y su pañuelo amarrado, ay, dile a Conde que suba por la ventana ya. Dile a Conde que suba por la ventana. La Delia, dile a Conde que suba, ay, dile a Conde que suba por la ventana ya. Dile a Conde que suba, ay, dile a Conde que suba por la ventana. Sea ya, bambula sea ya, sea ya, bambula sea ya. Conmigo yo baila bomba, bambula sea ya. Conmigo yo baila plena, bambula sea ya. La bomba aquí te encantó, bambula sea ya. Bomba de Maya, bambula sea ya. Sea ya, bambula sea ya. Sea ya, bambula sea ya. Conmigo yo baila bomba, bambula sea ya. Conmigo yo baila plena, bambula sea ya. La bomba aquí te encantó, la bomba de Maya, bambula sea ya. Sea ya, bambula sea ya. Sea ya, bambula sea ya. Conmigo yo baila bomba, bambula sea ya. Conmigo yo baila plena, bambula sea ya. La bomba aquí te encantó, bambula sea ya. La bomba de Maya, bambula sea ya. Sea ya, bambula sea ya. Bambula sea ya. Un Belén para Cortijo, un Belén para Imael, un Belén de bomba y plena, como le gustaba a él. Un Belén para Cortijo, un Belén para Imael, un Belén de bomba.
And I'm laughing because I'm enjoying the performance all over again. Okay, so, and I enjoy performing Loíza tradition. That's like my favorite bomba. But I remember when I was brought into Festival de Santiago since I was a little kid, and I was afraid of the Vejigantes. I would used to hide under the dash of my mom's car because I was like, oh my God, this thing that is coming through the window. And she was like, no, you don't have to scare. You don't have to be scared. You don't have to fear anything. They're here. It's a celebration. It's a carnival. And I was like, I don't know about that. But so Marta, can you please tell us, how do you think the integration of religious components, in this case, Santiago Apóstol, right, which is the saint, could influence an artistic performance or a tradition
you have to look historically, you know, and this is why history is so important, because if you look throughout the countries where enslavement was propagated by the Catholic Church, you see that imagery that has to do with Catholicism is used to hide African traditions. So that you can't look at Puerto Rico isolated, which I know a lot of people here try to look at it isolated from other islands, but you cannot, right? Because the boat stopped in many places and dropped off our family in different places. Mm-hmm. So that when you look at African traditions and how they survived in our countries under enslavement, you see that Catholic images were used to hide African imagery. So that the work that has to be done in terms of Santiago, Fernando Ortiz and Ricardo Alegría felt that the Santiagos could be Ogún or could be Shango. El Santiago de los Niños could be El Igual, right? Mm-hmm. But that work still has to be done. You're going to caminar el festival at least 4 times completely. And when you see how cuando sale Santiago de los Niños, rum is poured, then ice is poured, right? The element of hot or cold, right? So that's the element of balance. So that you have to look at el igual as that, right? De los niños es el niño de Atoche. In other traditions in Puerto Rico, it's Santiago de los Niños. So that cuando salen los santos van al cementerio primero y ahí hay explosión, right? The firecrackers and fireworks. That can easily be connected to other traditions in other islands que tiene que ver con las tradiciones conga. So that when you're looking at the festival, you're looking at entertainment in part, but you're looking at deep-seated traditions that have remained within our community. Como te estaba diciendo anterior, we need continued research into these traditions, into the figures, ¿verdad? Porque el Gigante could be Moco Jambi in Jamaica and in Barbados, because son los mismos con distintos colores. And when I was in Nigeria, en los festivales y en las procesiones, hay siempre una figura de Gigante, que pueden ser los ancestros, ¿verdad? Y si tú lo ves como se presentan en otros lugares, puede ser el gigante un ancestro, ¿verdad? So that cuando uno mira a las tradiciones nuestras, que tienen tradiciones espirituales, porque todas las tradiciones africanas lo tienen, ¿verdad? Uno está mirando no solamente una retención de nuestras tradiciones, we're maintaining a history and legacy, right? But we're also understanding that because enslavement and racism caused people to hide what they were practicing, that these imagery of Catholicism probably was used, right, to hide the traditions that were African. Because people could be taken to jail or killed for practicing African religions.
You know, that is, yeah, that's a universal way of understanding how the African diaspora was expressing and trying to keep their spiritual beliefs and everything that they did. Marta, you're so right, because you hide and you camouflage.
Exactly.
You camouflage your beliefs in a way that is acceptable. Otherwise, you, as you said, you can be ostracized and or killed.
Continue practicing.
Yes, you can continue practicing. So I saw 3 things in that exhibit, in that video clip, Yasmar. Thank you again for doing it, and thank you for elevating the work of Danza Fiesta, which we love you guys over there. Danza Fiesta, it's beautiful to see your work, and it's beautiful to see it, as I mentioned before, Raul's name, and he means so much to you, Yasmar, and to us here in Kimbamba. Just a beautiful person, and que paz descanse. I saw 3 things that touch upon everything that we're talking about. Number 1, the mix of the costumes, right? Some of the women were wearing skirts that are much more useful or used in different kind of settings, and some of the women wearing the classic, what we call the bomba attire. That was, as we all know, now we're in 2020 as opposed to 1950. We all know that a lot of that was that costume and vestuario was a creation of
the tourism.
of ways to try to create tourism opportunities and Instituto de Cultura at the time in Puerto Rico. But the second thing I noticed is, of course, the introduction of the Gigantes themselves, and as you mentioned, Yasmar, about what that meant for you when you were a child, and what that's all means. And and Malta, you referred to this in part because it blows me away how las fiestas patronales throughout the island, when were manifested in Loíza, from what I've read in the history, is that el santo patrón of Loíza was a different one, and it was changed.
Patricio.
Bien interesante, San Patricio, which in the United States anyway, we assume that's associated with Ireland.
Right.
I could be completely wrong because I'm not a full student of Catholicism, but the fact that it was changed over to Santiago Apóstol just is fascinating to me, because of the history of the Moors in Spain. And the last thing, and this is super important to me because I was going to refer to it anyway, and Yasmar, I'm so happy that it was a part of this video. So that one song that you guys sang, Un Belén para Cortijo, un Belén para Isabel, un Belén de bomba y plena, como le gustaba a él. So Kimbamba's foundational root of our journey into bomba comes from our association with La Familia Cepeda of Santurce. And that's our foundational root of knowledge. Of course, we've been so lucky that we've learned from other families, and we've been super lucky that we absorb all this information that's now accessible to all of us from all parts of the island, not just Santurce. But because we learned in Santurce, that song about Un Belén is exactly what I was referring to before, Yasmar. So when we just did this drum circle for the father of one of our performers, John Carpena, who passed away of COVID last week, that was a song I sang. And it's a song that I learned from La Familia Cepeda that is not the only song that we use when we are elevating the spirits of someone who makes a transition, but it's definitely a song that's used a lot. And it anchors what I do. Belén, Belén, este es tu último Belén. Belén, Belén, este es tu último Belén. And that anchors, creates the foundation of everything we're talking about in this conversation. There are many, many people who practice bomba throughout the diaspora and in Puerto Rico who make a very, very bright line between religious practices and bomba. I mean, que los dos no se pueden ver juntos. Y Malta, and I'm watching. I know you thought about this, and I know you can react to it. But pero a bright line. No.
I know, but it's wrong.
Bomba no tiene que ver nada con religión. Bomba no tiene que ver nada con espiritismo. Bomba no tiene nada con santería o palo mayombe or any other African-derived religious practice. It's a bright line that people paint in the sand. And what I love about this conversation, Yasmar, because you put us together in this room, in this space, right? So, we can talk about espiritualidad.
Eso es lo que es, espiritualidad. Y en Puerto Rico el espiritismo is the African tradition por los Congos que vienen, que son la mayoría de los grupos que vienen, son los últimos que vienen, right? Because the ship that comes in, some of the last ships are directly from the Congo. And they're carrying children. Que quiere decir que if these ships came in late in the clandestine process of enslavement, this memory was alive in those children. Again, so that definitely spirituality and I mean, we were honored to bring La Familia Cepeda to one of the concerts we did at Lincoln Center. And the songs that the father sang were filled with spirituality.
Yes.
Filled with spirituality. So there is absolutely, it's the center of what Bomba is.
Yes, and I'm glad that everyone here is mentioning it and everyone here is talking to it, because one of the things that I've always said is like, when you bring someone to another country, that person does not strip out of their beliefs, of their traditions, of their ideas, of their knowledge. It's impossible. What they're gonna do is that you're really gonna try to fight for what is yours and express it in any way you can. So if you're coming in with these traditions that you already have, there's no way that we can disconnect the spirit, right? And then make it seem like, oh, this is only black and white. Like there's nothing else that connects or correlates with everything that I practiced before.
But that's the only thing you come with. If you're enslaved, that's the only thing you come with, your memory, your mind. You don't come with things. You come with your mind and your body. Right? So that if that's what you come with, that's what you practice. And that's what you retain.
Pero lo fascinante, the fascinating thing about this is that the pushback has been, que si, if we talk about spirituality openly, then it will drive people away from Bomba. Or at least that was a premise that I saw when I started, because when I was researching this, I started researching and writing about Bomba in the 1980s, and it's been part of my lifestyle ever since, right? And that bright line that I told you about before is real. Hay gente que dice, no, porque si vamos a hablar de eso, la gente no lo van a apreciar. They're not going to be open to it. It won't reach everyone that we want to reach. And it's been a real issue. I mean, to the point that I understand some of it, but as Marta just mentioned just now, I mean, when enslaved Africans came to the New World, they came to this world, to the New World, this hemisphere, with nothing else but those memories. So at one point, it has to be exhibited somehow, some way.
Exactly.
Oh, no, fine. This raises the issue that in Puerto Rico, racism openly has really not been discussed, right?
There you go.
So that now the younger generation, and all power to them, right, are beginning to deal with issues of racism and are beginning to connect to Black Lives Matter, movement for Black Lives, right, are beginning to honor those traditions and look for the ancestral traditions. But, the reality is that in our countries, evangelism, Pentecostalism, right, and no shade on any tradition, right, sees these traditions as devil worship, as something negative.
Right.
And, as scholars and as people who are doing the research, we can't tapar el cielo con la mano. You have to look at the research and where it leads you. You have to look at the facts and where they lead you, right? And as you said, like when you looked at the costumes, the first line of costumes were colonial. Were colonial.
Yes.
Right? So then the next phase is more liberated in terms of skirt, in terms of the dress. But when they institute these dances, right? And you said like when the institute started sort of folklorizing these dances, what do? They put it in a colonial setting, right? So that locks it in the memory of people that this is something backwards, that this is something que no vale la pena, that this is something that doesn't have value, right? And Yasmar and the work that you're doing and the work that all the young people there and here are doing is saying, no, this is of African tradition and this is African spirituality and we're going to celebrate it. And we're not ashamed to celebrate it. So all power to you all because keeping it alive when it could easily have been erased.
Thank you so much. I was just sharing with Marta before we started the interview that this research, like this panel, came out of a research that I did back in University of Puerto Rico, right, when I was studying. And it happened because I studied with a West African company in Miami. And when I got back to Puerto Rico, I wanted to combine and find the similarities between the bomba, our tradition, and the West African traditions that I was working back there. And in my honor thesis, I put it as bomba as an artistic tradition, very intentional, because it was not seen as, oh, this is an artistic tradition. No, it was seen like, oh, yes, this is a tradition that we have and that we see, but not as something that we study and we research. And there are other countries who have similar traditions that they create whole bachelor's degrees with this. And how is it that we didn't even have one single class at the University of Puerto Rico back then?
Wow.
I wasn't even able to choose freely the person who I wanted to lead this thesis, because they were like, well, maybe we need someone with this particular title or this other title. And I was like, no, I'm gonna bring the people who are experts in this field, because they're experts in this field, regardless of if they have a PhD or not. They're experts. They've been their life working on this. And we have to give the respect and the credit where it's due. So this is what she was referring to. What's the backstory of this panel?
Yeah, I've had the experience too with going to Puerto Rico, and when we were learning and building our practice of my family will tell you I've taught them. I've come to Puerto Rico. Half of my family was born there, and the other half here, and they said that I have taught them about being Puerto Rican and reminded them to search and look on the island for the culture. It's there. But if you're not in tune to it, you're not aware. And I've been able to do things like buscando pandero, tornillo, buscando cuero, and going to the places on the island on these assignments to look for instruments and to talk to people and learn. And in that process, I have recruited my cousins and my aunts and uncles to take me to these places, to go with me. And they say that I have taught them to hold on to Puerto Rico in a way they hadn't seen, the way we hold on to it here. Yeah. And so for me, for them to express that to me was humbling. I'm like, pero es lo que hay. Yo estoy buscando lo que hay. Esto es lo que me enseñaron mi familia. Lo llevaron de Puerto Rico a Pensilvania. Continuamos en el amor de la cultura puertorriqueña, you know. How could they be letting it go? And here I was just holding on.
I don't think people are letting it go, but I think that there's a level of practicando oculto, because recuérdate que, you know, we are dancing around it, pero Puerto Rico is, right, a territory of the United States. What does that mean? It's a colony of the United States.
Colony, right,
so what is the education that young people get in school? What is the information they get in school? Very much like in El Barrio de Nueva York and in all our communities, our kids don't learn about their traditions. Right. They learn to be sort of U.S. citizens, right? Poor U.S. citizens, because the education is so bad. So that you have the same thing here. The university is now talking about having a program of African traditions and African history and so on and so forth, but it's still not done. And this is 2020. So that's why the work that you all are doing, you know, is so critical. It's absolutely critical, because if you don't do it, then it will be erased. Right. So that you're cultural warriors. You have to see yourselves as cultural warriors, because that's what it is. I mean, I'm here, este corredor largo. Why are we doing this? Porque no hay otro lugar except Copi that we know of, en Ponce, with the Caribbean Festival, que tienen un lugar, right, that you can see yourself reflected. Mm-hmm. We have to do that all of the time. That's not work that you do on the side. That's work that you center.
Right.
Right, and that's so true, Marta. I mean, in 2020, I think there might be 3 books, full books, and maybe a 4th that just came out recently about plena in the history of Puerto Rico.
Mhm.
There's been one issue of a Centro de Estudio Puertorriqueño at the college dedicated to bomba, a full issue in the journal, which is an excellent, excellent contribution to the field. But it's the resources to study, Jasmine, as you were mentioning when you were studying, are so few and far between that it's pretty outrageous. When Quimbamba, Segundo Quimbamba is the home of the publication Guido Maraca. And when I started doing Guido Maraca, I was like, just as basically as something to compile and document the diaspora's exhibitions of bomba and plena. And little did I know, and I read it much later from Pablo Luis Rivera and the people who put that journal issue together, that apparently Guido Maraca was the first ever publication dedicated to bomba and plena.
Wow.
It came out of Jersey City, New Jersey. It came out of right here, this house.
Mm-hmm.
And it just goes to show us that, Martha, you said it so well. I mean, we don't imagine what the curriculum is for students, be it in the diaspora or be it in Puerto Rico.
Exactly.
It is so far short of what is needed and what is relevant and what sustains us. And I also agree with you 100% que algo ha cambiado recientemente,
Mm-hmm.
maybe in the last 15 to 20 years, because I did this well before 20 years ago. But now, la juventud y los mayores, pero led by la juventud, are like literally centering bomba in everything they do.
Mm-hmm.
Yo no he visto bomba como esto ahora in the last 5 years. Unbelievable. Right?
Exploded.
It's just amazing.
It's like a calling, like everyone really, it's hungry for it.
Yeah, and the creativity also.
Right.
What they're producing and what we're listening to with those beats and what's filling them out as well. It's just amazing.
I think that research has to be done, and before we got on, I told Yasmar she has to continue that work. And we all have to continue that work because the reality is que los mayores se están yendo.
Sí.
Y esa memoria se está yendo.
Sí, sí, sí.
So uno tiene que entrar en las comunidades ahora porque la inteligencia está ahí. The intelligence is there. I mean, just with listen, it's no mistake that Maricruz Rivera, the founder of COPI, and I decided to found El Corredor in a community because the knowledge is within our communities.
Yeah.
It's not in the university.
It's just
Because it's not in the university because you just said it.
Yeah.
You just said it. You know what I'm saying? It's not there. So we have to create the spaces to do that.
Right.
You know, and you're doing it with Segunda Cumbamba, Mama, you're doing it with Danzartes and your research. And we have to continue doing that work so that that memory is not lost. Right?
Yeah. And I agree with Yasmar when you said that. I'm just learning that in grants that I'm writing now for curricula for New Jersey State, the schools here, the public schools, in trying to get what we do, bomba and plena, as part of the regular curriculum of arts. So I have to learn this language of art form, art, like just kind of speak to that, you know. But they absolutely, at least now, are expressing an interest. We've been seeing it in the performance of folks, their folk art. There's an interest at that level, and also in the schools to bring that kind of programming to young students and into the schools for the regular day, not an extra activity, not an after school program, but actually during their school day after English or math, or they got this program. So that's exciting.
The interesting thing is that there are curriculums like that happening. Like right now, one of the organizations that I work with or collaborate with, BAM, Brooklyn Academy of Music, they do have African dance beats, right? We go for full residency and we teach them from a specific country in Africa throughout those 3 months, 4 months. And the students are immersed in that. They learn part of the language because they learn a few words, they learn the dance, they learn the songs, they learn the rhythms. And then at the end, they go to Dance Africa where they can actually see a group or a company from Africa performing here. So it's like a whole immersion in this new culture. So we can do it because these are things that are happening. And,
and we need to do, we must do it. That's number one.
Agreed.
And number two is that we this is my personal opinion. Our work is not folk art. It is not. The work that we are doing is essential work because it speaks to the resistance of our people and our intentionality in surviving.
Mm-hmm.
So when folk art is a European structure to say what we value as European art is not what you do.
Right.
You do folk art. No,
right.
No.
Right.
The center of our being, right, is the Afrocentric vision. And we have to honor that. So we don't have to use language that people want to impose on us to say your stuff is not as good as our stuff.
Right.
Right?
And
so language becomes very critical in terms of how we speak about the work that we do. Because the work that we do is second to none. Como mi mamá decía, no somos un clavo o un cero a la izquierda. You know what I'm saying? We're at the center of it. So we have to be very clear. And this is a historical moment, right? That we have to implant what we have fought for all these years. We have to make it the center of our children's being.
Absolutely. And I would like to close this interview with both of you sharing you've been sharing your personal experience all throughout the panel, but let's speak particularly about in the process of creation, right? As a director of a company, as a researcher, share with us about that process of incorporating spirituality into, it could be performing spaces or research spaces.
Sure. So we don't perform in a vacuum, right? So if we perform at a time in which one of our members passed away, then the entire performance not only is centered on that, and we talk about it. We do a form of libation, right? And just calling for the spirits to help that transition into the next world. And I will start when I incorporate the lyrics. I'll adapt the lyrics to that person and refer specific to him or to her, and talk about and then use that as a vehicle to honor that legacy and honor that beautiful life that was part of us and now is somewhere else. So that's incorporated, and we do it deliberately.
Nancy.
Yeah, we did. Nancy Torres, one of our members, passed. Died of cancer. And way too young, and we did a whole musical suite in that way. I also had we also had the amazing opportunity once to in Bon Plenazo in Ostos. We put on a performance with 4 members of a gospel choir of the Bethesda Baptist Church out of Jersey City. 4 African American singers, and we did 2 or 3 songs with them in Bomba and in Plena on the same stage with Segunda Quimbamba. So it was a fusion of gospel music in the Black church here in the United States, along with the rhythms of Puerto Rico.
It was very powerful.
Yeah, it took off. It took off.
People loved it.
Yeah. And
loved it.
Había un momento dado when we were doing this one song that comes out of the book of Pares Matos. And because Pares Matos was using a lot of the language out of Guayana, in his poetry, we were using some of that in the songs that we were doing, and there was a wonderful episodes of me sharing that language in the poem to the 4 members of the gospel choir. And someone actually took me aside and said, "You know what we're doing here is we're actually sharing African remnants of our language as exhibited in the Caribbean and sharing with African Americans." Y eso me cambió, porque recuerda que there's parts of the Caribbean that at least retained a lot of that African language. And in the United States, that was so forbidden that most of it, not everywhere, of course, but most of it was lost. And that was just a beautiful way. So to answer your question, Yasmar, we incorporated in many ways. We are much more obvious about it when we talk about, death and transition. But at the root of everything that we do is this connection to everything we just talked about here.
Thank you so much, Juan.
Bueno, I think that all I can say is mi abuela era espiritista. Yo me crié en el espiritismo. El espíritu era el guía de la casa, right? Mi abuela decía y mi mamá y mi papá decían, somos católicos. My parents used to say we're Catholic, right? And if you ask my grandmother, she would say, oh, I'm Catholic. Pero era espiritista. She would heal. She would, I guess now you call it Reiki, right? Putting hands on. But we have people who have that don, that gift of putting hands on.
Yes.
Y mi abuela era eso, era una espiritista que podía curar con sus manos, pues podía curar con tabaco. Right? And in addition to that, being an incredibly intelligent woman, she never went to school. So how she made it in life, living in Loíza and then getting to the United States, which I was too young to even understand that was an issue, and how she carved out a life and brought her 3 children, her 3 sons to New York. She was a warrior woman, a cultural warrior, pero era espiritista. Yo no iba a la escuela y no cogí un exam unless she blessed me. Eso era hierba y eso era tabaco being blown on you. And, that was what propelled me to go to school, right? I would study, but then I got, dame la bendición, right? And la bendición was tabaco or hierba, being put on you. So that I think for most of us, because we have acquired a language that's not ours, and I mean a language, a narrative, a way of framing things that are not ours, we don't acknowledge those people who got us where we are. And if we scratch the surface and ask some of the elders in our family, ¿quién era espiritista en la familia?
Well, yeah.
That somebody's going to pop up. Pero ella tenía un don de poder ver más allá o lo que sea, right? Fought to hide it,
sí.
Right?
Yes.
And I remember when I started the Caribbean Cultural Center, and about the same time, about 5 years later, I initiated into the Lucumí tradition in Cuba, right? Y todo el mundo me decía, pero tú eres puertorriqueña, tú no eres negra, tú no eres cubana, tú no eres negra, tú no eres tan negra. And explaining it, right, was an issue because you almost have to teach your own, right, to look in their own tradition, in their own families, and recognize what's there. Because we've been taught to step away from it. Porque mami, abuela me decían, no hables de lo que se hace aquí. Right? No hables de lo que se hace aquí. No le digas que te pusimos tabaco, no digas que hicimos esto, right? Todos los sábados yo limpiaba la bóveda, el altar de los ancestros con mi abuela. Right? ¿Y cuántos de nosotros no hemos bailado tu rotillo, esa era la música que ponía mi abuela. Y todos los sábados bailábamos, a Celina y Rautilio, because después que uno limpiaba la bóveda y le ponía flores a los santos, pues eso era cocinar y poner la música. I'm not unique to that.
Right.
I know I'm not unique to that. All of us have it somewhere, somehow.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? We need to talk about it and we need to acknowledge it. We need to embrace it because that's who we are.
Yes.
You know, and I realized, and that's why I intentionally initiated, right? Because I said, I don't want my children to look at images that don't look like that. Because representation for our children is critical. So I wanted to make sure that when I have my babies, and I have 2 sons, that they saw imagery that looked like them, affirmed them, right? And talk to them about how powerful, how wonderful, how beautiful they are, right? So we need to, in this moment, this historical moment that we're facing, we need to develop a narrative that's, again, that centers us, that acknowledges the journey that we have gone through as a people, and frame it so that our young people can carry it on and not feel the need to erase it.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you so much for those beautiful words, Marta. Thank you, Juan and Nanette. This has been wonderful, amazing. I'm honored to be sharing the space with both of you, with your knowledge, with your passion, with everything that you've done so far. And I want to invite everyone who's watching this panel to leave a comment. If you have a question, continue this conversation, because these are the conversations that really unite us. And as Marta was saying, it's critical that we continue to do this. It's critical that we recognize and thought and look for that, who we are, right? That identity, that we have it, that we carry it, that we've been having it forever. And sometimes you just push it away because of the system where we were brought up. That was what we were taught. But now we know better, and we've seen better, and we learn, and we research. And then we have to get these amazing conversations with artists, with researchers. So join our conversation, type in your questions, and from the bottom of my heart, to all of you, I'm sending you much light, much love. And this whole panel, I would love to dedicate it to those who were with us, but that left this past week, especially my dear friend and company member from Danza Fiesta, Raul Wilson.
Yes.
Sending you
Yes.
So much.
a loving journey.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marta.
Thank
Thank you, Yasmar. Gracias.
you.